Hi everyone, my name is Brittany Chang, and like she said, I'm presenting on the Human-Centered Design course thread. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about 3 classes that I took and kind of trying to tie them together with an understanding of why human-centered design matters. But before I talk about my classes, I want to talk a little bit about the world that I come from. And I'll kind of tie this in later on. But basically, I grew up in Palo Alto, and I go to school here at UC Berkeley, so born and raised in the Bay Area. And I'm studying electrical engineering and computer science, so I'm studying in engineering for an engineering degree. But I'm also interested in design, specifically human-centered design, and how understanding users' needs is important in the process of creating and designing technologies. And a lot of my friends are engineers or designers, and we all have a passion for creating things, building things, innovating, and designing. And that picture is kind of a typical position that I'm in because of what I study and what I like to do. And the reason why I'm talking about my world is because I think that the world that we come from and the world that we grow up in, the people that we surround ourselves by, give us certain assumptions. So we come into creating technologies with certain ideas about how people work, how the world works, how people think, and cultures. And I kind of looked up assumptions in thesaurus.com, and some of the synonyms that I came up with were presumption, supposition, hypothesis, and surmise. And if you think about it, these words really mean guess. An assumption is really just kind of an educated guess about people, about the world, about society and technology, based on my own personal worldview. And so as an engineer and as a designer, I believe that a humanities education actually does matter a lot because it teaches us to question the assumptions that we have about society and about technology through reading, through discussion, through understanding kind of what historians and sociologists have thought about theories of the history of technology. And so what I found really valuable in doing this course thread has been the purpose of questioning my assumptions through a humanities education. So now we can talk a little bit about the courses that I took. I took 3 courses, ISF 100D, which was Technology, Society, and Culture, Sociology 121, which was Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and Architecture 110, which is Social and Cultural Factors in Design, specifically architectural design. And I kind of tied in these 3 together by focusing specifically on technology, innovation, and design. And as well, I'm presenting on the Human-Centered Design course thread. So how is this human-centered design process, which starts with understanding users' needs, and then ideating based on understanding users' needs, generating concepts, testing, prototypes, and then finally coming up with a solution based on human needs. How is this relevant in the creation of technology and innovation? So like I said, one of the classes that I took was ISF 100D. And kind of general overview of what we talked about was mainly just technology and how it's related to society and culture. And like I said before, I'm thinking about assumptions. So I came into this class with certain assumptions about what technology was. Remember, I grew up in Silicon Valley, and my assumptions about this word technology kind of look a little bit like this. Technology equals computers, the internet, Google, Wikipedia, Facebook, all the things that I surround myself with that I'm clicking around on every day. And I never really thought that much about the impact of technology on my life or on society. So through this class, I had to think more about some other aspects of technology, beyond just like all the things I interact with that make my life a little bit easier. So this is also an aspect of technology. Technology shapes and interacts with society and culture. The ways that technology is created, the ways that technology is used, influence us just as much as we influence it. And that's something that I really started to think about as I took this course. So I guess sometimes people ask, like when you're taking a course like this about technology and society, is technology good or evil? And the answer to that is yes. Oops. It's both. And I think that's kind of where design comes in, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next class that I took was Sociology 121, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And some of the things we talked about are like, what is innovation, why does it matter, who is an entrepreneur, what does an entrepreneur do, and kind of global and social context of innovation. Like I said, I also came into this class with assumptions. This time my assumptions were centered around the idea of, or concept of an entrepreneur. What is an entrepreneur? Once again, I grew up in Silicon Valley. So my idea of an entrepreneur, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, or maybe Larry Page from Google, or maybe Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. But it was a very centered very much around the world that I grew up with, the world that I surround myself with even now. But as a result of this class, I had to think a little bit about the social context of entrepreneurship. Not even thinking about a global context, just domestically, the typical entrepreneur in America actually looks a lot more like this. His name is Phil Ipple, owns a hardware store in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And this is actually the more typical face of entrepreneurship, as I learned through this class, in America. And if we want to talk globally, there's even more, like, typical entrepreneur in Peru probably owns a little crafts cart that he wheels around and will sell crafts. So entrepreneurship actually looks different depending on where you're from. And so I learned to question my assumptions, even about these ideas that I thought were obvious. And so then the final class that I took most recently this semester, social and cultural factors in design, specifically architectural design, which was pretty interesting for me coming from kind of an EECS background. And some of the things that we talked about were understanding the subcultures that use and interact with the site, and what does it mean to when people and the environment interact in a space. And also kind of cultural ideas that are involved in a space, like how close people should be, how people should interact within a space, and how space is divided. This was the only class that I took for this course thread that involved a project. We did an ethnography project where we tried to study the culture of a group of people who used the space and redesigned the space. So the space that I picked, which is actually kind of funny because it's related to my worldview. I picked a Gora startup house, which is a startup residential incubator for students who are interested in entrepreneurship. Most of them are interested in a high-tech entrepreneurship. So it was very much aligned with things that I was interested in. It's also a very old house that was designed by Julia Morgan. And it's a new kind of concept that they were trying out as students live together and have ideas and try to follow through on their ideas. So I visited the house, and I drew kind of a floor plan of the first floor. I am not an architect, so it's just kind of a drawing. But I drew a floor plan of the first floor and of the house, focusing on the first floor because that's where the common space of the house was. And then I did my first redesign. And this first redesign was based on my initial kind of basic observations of the house and assumptions of the house. And the redesign, basically what it does is it just kind of makes the common space bigger. It kind of makes some of the rooms bigger, gets rid of the bedrooms on the first floor and uses them as common space. Because I kind of had this assumption that the people in the house needed more common space. Just because it was based on assumption. So what we had to do was, after we did our first redesign, we had to go and talk to the users of the house, or of whatever site we chose, interact with them, hang out with them, and then we did this thing where we created a taxonomy, which is basically taking a bunch of the words that people said to us in conversations and organizing them in a way that kind of represented the culture of the site. So I tried to divide the words that people used into words that describe the space and words that describe the culture. And I tried to analyze the culture of the community that lived in the house. And with this knowledge, I revisited my first redesign. And I recognized, like I said before, that my first redesign had been based on a lot of assumptions. That, you know, residents just needed more common space and not really any reason why. Just people always want more space, right? But the reality was that the residents actually needed more clearly defined common space. The house suffered from what I call a triple identity crisis, in that the people who lived in the house was a historic landmark that was designed by Julia Morgan, so that was one part of the identity. It was also a startup incubator, so the students were very driven, very motivated, very interested in entrepreneurship, had a lot of ideas, didn't necessarily like listening to authority. And it was also a student dorm, so it was a bunch of students living together, really busy, involved with schoolwork, as well as on campus. And so the house itself was missing a bit of a cohesive identity. And so the second time through on the redesign, I focused on trying to allow the people in the space, the residents of the space, to create their own identity and to kind of show it off through community boards, through posters on the stairways. There is more common space, like I did draw more common space, but there's also just a general sense of wanting to, based on this knowledge that there was a triple identity crisis going on, allowing the residents to think about and create their own identity, their cultural identity. So my assumptions in this class were about design. I think a lot of times we look at design as the designer is the expert, the designer has, you could also replace this with the word engineer. The designer or the engineer is the expert and has the necessary training and knowledge needed to solve some problem. And I think design is a little bit more complicated than that. We also need to understand the needs of a microculture or a set of users who will be using the product or the technology or the building. This is just some of the people who lived at Agora. They're playing, I don't know if you can see, but they're playing with a remote control helicopter, and that was, I thought it was representative of the culture in the house. So we go back to the question that I asked in the beginning, which was, why does human-centered design matter? And I think as a result of these classes, I came to the conclusion that human-centered design matters because as creators of technology, products, or buildings, we bring in social and cultural assumptions that stem from our own perspectives of the world. And to design things well, we need to be able to identify and question our own assumptions. We need to be able to learn about and understand the realities of the user, what cultural and social context they are in, and design for their needs rather than our own. Only then can we be able to create, innovate, and design solutions that don't just try to solve the problem or any problem, but actually try to solve the right problem and solve it well. Thank you.
Any questions for Brittany? I just have one. So when you were showing the pictures of
Yeah, I can go back.
Entrepreneur.
Which pictures?
Of who you thought of as the entrepreneur.
Oh, yeah.
About the entrepreneur. I noticed that they were men. So
Yeah, and they were white men too.
White
yeah.
men, I noticed the second one, and
Yeah.
white men, everybody you mentioned.
That's something we talked about in the class.
I was wondering if you, as a female in design, and you're doing a human-centered, have you had any thoughts about gender issues?
Yeah.
Or in terms of entrepreneurship or design or engineering or anything like that?
Yeah, I didn't have time to talk about it in this, but we definitely talked about women in entrepreneurship, women in engineering, and that's actually part of my own worldview too, because I have a personal theory that women whose moms are engineers are more likely to grow up to study a technical field, and the reason for that is because in our world, it's so normal. My mom was an engineer, and I just grew up thinking it's completely normal for a woman to be an engineer. And I didn't have any sense of it being not normal until I kind of grew up and other people were like, what, you're studying that? So that's another sense of how your world shapes your assumptions about things. So I grew up assuming that that was totally normal until later on people started, yeah.